She was a young mother in Missoula, Montana. One October night in 2010, she tucked her child into bed, but by morning she was gone forever. No signs of robbery. No goodbye note. Only brutal force, and a mystery that haunted the town for 10 years, until DNA revealed a secret nobody expected. Before we get into what happened, hit subscribe and drop a comment with your location and the time you're watching this. It helps this story reach more people like you. On the night of October 15, 2010, in Missoula, Montana, Emily Hargrove, a 30-year-old community outreach coordinator, returned to her modest apartment after a grueling shift in the biting frost. The following morning, her former spouse came to see their toddler and discovered the door ajar. He entered, shouting out, but silence greeted him. Emily was sprawled lifeless in the bedroom, sheets tangled. Marks of a fight scarred the carpet. No robbery, no goodbye note, just brutal force. Authorities gathered blood, fibers, and boot impressions, but no perpetrator emerged. An unusual DNA trace was identified, but it aligned with no records in Cody's. The district attorney cautioned this might turn into an unsolved mystery. Emily's loved ones pleaded for resolution. Locals held vigils with flickering lights. Her little girl matured thinking her mom was snatched by a phantom assailant. Then in 2020, Montana started employing investigative genealogy. A fresh investigator followed that DNA and revealed unexpected links in a lineage chart. An identity slowly surfaced. Robert Klein, a well-known plumber in Missoula. Once recognized for bantering with everyone in town, he now confronted the threat of revelation. As officers discreetly gathered a soda bottle and gum wrapper from his refuse, the reality started to pivot. DNA is infallible, and a mystery concealed for over a decade at last began to fracture. Before plunging further into the tale, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell for alerts on fresh episodes. On the night of October 15, 2010, Missoula, Montana was enveloped in the frosty shroud of a highland autumn. With blasts from the bitterroots rushing through serene avenues, depositing fine dustings of frost on eaves, foliage and pathways, the Riverside Avenue district appeared to have drifted into an premature doze. With merely a handful of dispersed residences emitting amber glows inside a compact two-bedroom unit, Emily Hargrove, 30, had just concluded a taxing shift at the local support center. A lone parent to a 3-year-old boy, her existence was hectic and at times daunting, but she invariably mustered a warm grin. Residents frequently spotted her toting her son to the adjacent market. That evening, nobody realized what transpired after Emily secured her entrance, preserving only the facade of a typical chilly dusk. The subsequent dawn, Jason Mills, Emily's ex-spouse, showed up as customary to spend time with their child. He rapped multiple times, but received no reply. Then attempted the knob and realized the door unlatched. A wave of foreboding quickened his pulse as he ventured in. The corridor illumination remained lit. A jacket slung haphazardly over the couch, and the atmosphere dense with oppressive quietude. Jason bellowed Emily's name forcefully, anticipating a response, but solely the hiss of breeze through a pane fissure responded. He arrived at the sleeping chamber and swung the portal to a vista that petrified him. Emily reclined immobile on the mattress, form askew, countenance ashen, gaze partially ajar as though trapped in an ultimate instant of terror. The linens were rumpled, a cushion on the ground, and indications of a scuffle were evident in the scraped traces and shifted objects. Contusions adorned her throat and limbs, irrefutable proof of a savage assault. Close by on the nightstand, a fractured ceramic mug had dripped tea onto the covers. In the tiny space adjacent, her 3-year-old son slumbered peacefully, oblivious that his mother's hug was lost eternally. In alarm, Jason dialed 911, his tone quivering, phrases fracturing amid weeps. Within moments, Missoula Police Department cruisers arrived, their crimson and azure beams pulsing across the tranquil lane, attracting the wary stares of residents peeking through parted entrances. Equipped personnel promptly safeguarded the location, cordoning it and commanding none to near. They summoned the Missoula County Forensic Squad and commenced cataloging boot imprints in the frost exterior, an unsecured portal, no evidence of pillaging, but all directed toward intimate aggression. A on-duty investigator stooped over the corpse and softly informed an associate, this was unquestionably a killing, not a mishap or self-harm. For Missoula, a tranquil town cradled in Montana's peaks where folks identified one another at the bazaar or chapel, a vicious slaying in a housing area was inconceivable. The blare of alarms reverberated through the narrow path, disrupting the habitual serenity, indicating that the boundary between security and peril had been shattered in one frigid evening. As crimson and azure beams yet pulsed on the light frost, the Missoula County Forensics vehicle halted before Emily Hargrove's humble dwelling. Specialists emerged, attired in immaculate white protective gear, latex mitts, and substantial equipment cases. Without utterance, they acknowledged peers and commenced labor, aware every elapsing instant might obliterate delicate clues. Authorities expanded yellow barrier, isolating the environs, compelling locals to cluster behind frost-laden barriers. The already chill ambience intensified and waited. A specialist initiated snapping images of the outside. The marginally open portal, the veranda with distinct boot impressions guiding from the walkway to the ingress. The impressions were profound, implying a substantial or rushed individual. Silicone casts were meticulously positioned to retain them for subsequent evaluation. Every particular, from abrasions on the stairs to errant strands on a bolster, was documented with eerie accuracy. Within the sleeping chamber, flash bursts illuminated incessantly, seizing the somber vista. Emily's form slumped on the bed, tresses disheveled, covers in chaos. The dropped cushion was labeled with a yellow plastic marker beside a shattered mug with tea blotching the linens. A technician retrieved porcelain shards, inserting them in a transparent plastic sack tagged Evidence 17. Another utilized sanitized pincers to gather dark filaments, enclosing them in a tan paper pouch with an autograph and timestamp. On the chamber door grip, they detected a minuscule dark crimson blood smear, rapidly swabbed for specimen. Each phase was mutually supervised to guarantee no blunders. Meanwhile, another group examined the sitting area and culinary space, beaming torches into every nook. Their preliminary deduction, no traces of compelled ingress, unbroken portals and panes, no absent valuables. This bolstered the notion that the perpetrator was someone Emily recognized or admitted. Exterior, residents shivered in the piercing gust, murmuring fretfully. A lady clasping her offspring, tears in her gaze, uttered, "We've never witnessed anything similar in Missoula." An elder gentleman shook his cranium, tone stifled. She was so compassionate. Why, her apprehension disseminated swiftly, not merely in the narrow path, but throughout the serene town. Every whisper, every glimpse bore dread. If this could occur to Emily, it could befall anyone. As the sun ascended, regional press arrived. A Missoula Sentinel journalist established a camera opposite the avenue, lens sweeping to the barricaded residence. Crimson and azure beams yet pulsing. By 9 a.m., the initial headline surfaced digitally. Missoula lady discovered deceased in residence. Scant particulars were disclosed, but the caption alone rattled Montana. Telephones at the precinct rang ceaselessly with queries, gossip, and restrained alarm. Within the dwelling, the forensics group toiled in utter quietude, amassing nearly 35 specimens, blood, filaments, threads, boot impressions, even contusions on the casualty's form photographed for scrutiny. Each was enumerated, sealed, autographed, and recorded. When they departed, the front portal was secured. The residence formerly an offense locale. Riverside Avenue, once vibrant with youngsters' chuckles and infrequent vehicles, now rested in uncanny quietude, interrupted solely by the gust whistling through branches and the astonished stares of spectators. For Missoula, nestled tranquilly in Montana's mountains, that dawn signified the downfall of the utter sense of security everyone once relied upon. At the Montana State Crime Lab in Billings, the afternoon of October 16, 2010, progressed in a dense, burdensome ambience. When the vehicle transporting Emily Hargrove's body halted at the morgue ingress, a chill blast swept through the extended corridor, bearing an oppressive melancholy. Specialists in deep blue robes, rubber gloves, and visors accepted the stainless steel gurney shrouded with a white drape. All were mute, incapable of staying detached to the spectacle of a 30-year-old parent slain in her own abode. Chief pathologist Dr. Thomas Riley personally managed the post-mortem. With over 25 years at the facility and innumerable demises observed, he exhaled as he perused the concise dossier. Female, 30, located in sleeping chamber, presumed homicide. Nothing could ready for such a pointless demise. As the white drape was elevated, the chamber descended into mortal stillness. Emily lay beneath the fluorescent glows, her pallid epidermis marked by an ultimate expression of alarm. Riley first inspected outwardly. Evident bruises encircled her throat, uneven curves implying compression from a dull item or firm clasp. Inflamed temple with a minor rip in the dermis suggested a potent collision, possibly from being thrust onto the mattress or hitting a rigid surface amid a tussle. Minor abrasions on her limbs and wrists in Riley's expertise were protective injuries from attempting to liberate. These particulars instantly eliminated self-harm, which some tentatively pondered initially. No one could asphyxiate themselves to demise while enduring cranial injury and physical bruises. The group then amassed fluid specimens, the casualty's attire, and performed thorough examinations. Initial outcomes astonished them. Distinct indications of sexual violation. To Riley, this was not merely forensic proof, but a secondary injury, a profanation of the departed. He documented meticulously, stressing a complete DNA examination. Specimens were shifted to labeled containers. Case 102843. Casualty Hargrove Emily. They recognized a solitary error could deem proof inadmissible in tribunal, so every deed was intentional, manual exact. Hours subsequently, comprehensive tests disclosed an alien DNA specimen in the casualty's form, unmatched to her or any formerly omitted kin. This was a vital advancement. A third entity was in that sleeping chamber, depositing indisputable biological proof. The formal account was composed that evening. Riley enumerated the cause of demise. Asphyxiation merged with blunt trauma to the cranium. He appended that traces of a tussle and protective wounds demonstrated Emily battled fiercely to endure. Perspiration beaded on his visage despite the chill chamber. Each term inscribed like an accusation against the yet concealed slayer. When the substantial dossier was delivered to the principal investigator in Missoula, the precinct's conference chamber grew weightier than ever. A youthful officer murmured, "We're confronting a ferocious hunter who might assault anew if not halted promptly." On the display, offense locale and post-mortem images flickered. Throat bruises, temple swelling, limb scratches. No one referenced self-harm or mishap anymore. All concurred Emily Hargrove was the sufferer of a savage slaying with sexual violation components. The information disseminated rapidly. Regional press, which had reported ambiguously the prior day, now employed murder probe instead of dubious demise. In Missoula's society, alarm escalated. Young parents murmured they no longer sensed secure solitary at night. Guardians clutched their offspring firmer at bazaars or academy collections. One demise was sorrowful enough, but its happening in a secured abode in a serene district made everyone tremble. If Emily could be slain like this, who was genuinely secure? For Jason Mills, Emily's ex-spouse, the post-mortem outcomes left him dazed, reclining in quietude for hours. Though separated, their bond centered on their son. He knew Emily was resilient, not one to surrender readily. Her slaying, coupled with sexual violation, was a blade twisting in his already fragmented core. In the case ledger, Principal Investigator Sarah Jennings inscribed a concise, haunting phrase. "The slayer left DNA. It's our sole route to him," but no one realized then that route would extend a decade, meandering through impasses before yielding a jolt that would shake Montana's society. Once the post-mortem outcomes were disclosed, the Missoula Police Department proceeded to the subsequent stage, constricting suspects. With irrefutable proof that Emily Hargrove was slain, investigators recognized they had to commence with those nearest to her, where incentives often arise most plainly. In a compact questioning chamber under chill fluorescent glows, Jason Mills, Emily's ex-spouse, was summoned first. He sat hunched, palms interlocked firmly, countenance fatigued from 2 insomniac days. Jason asserted that on the night of October 15th, he was at his siblings' residence in Missoula's western outskirts and didn't depart, but authorities observed warning signs. Jason and Emily had intense conflicts over child guardianship, with judicial documents displaying strained sessions just weeks prior to her demise. Though no household violence was documented, the incentive of guardianship privileges was potent enough to render him a primary suspect. An investigator inquired bluntly, "Did you still care for Emily?" Jason hesitated, then uttered gently, "We had our variances, but I never desired harm upon her." His stifled tone didn't influence the authorities. They required proof, not sentiments. Next was Nathan Brooks, Emily's recent partner, a 34-year-old software engineer. He'd known Emily for merely 5 months. Nathan asserted that on October 15th, he was viewing a football match on television with buddies, departing the tavern around 10 p.m. The issue, no vouchers verified his attendance, and the companions endorsing him were informal associates, not dependable testifiers. His excuse was unstable enough for authorities to maintain him under vigilant observation. An investigator remarked, "He appears cooperative, but his gaze kept shifting when queried about 8 to 10 p.m., the interval when the sufferer was slain." Simultaneously, authorities visited the neighborhood clinic where Emily labored to interview associates. An aide, Lisa Harper, said Emily concluded her shift at 7 p.m., altered garments, and bid farewell to all. Lisa emphasized that Emily appeared ordinary, displaying no indications of concern or being tailed. She clearly remembered Emily saying, "Catch you later," before exiting. This aligned with the chronology authorities were constructing. Emily departed labor at 7 o'clock, arrived home around 7:30, and messaged her acquaintance Rachel Thompson at 8:30 p.m. In her final communication, Emily composed, "Kids dozing. At last, some peace." That was the ultimate signal from her device, succeeded by total quietude. Authorities didn't disregard district observers. They rapped on every portal, inquiring if anyone perceived or observed anything peculiar. An aged lady opposite the avenue said she observed Emily's illuminations on later than habitual around 10 p.m., but heard no odd sounds. A gentleman further along mentioned spotting a grey sedan cruising gradually through the zone around 9 p.m., but wasn't certain if it was pertinent. These fragmented segments were appended to the probe panel, but they didn't yet shape a distinct image. The preliminary suspect roster was inscribed on a whiteboard in the conference chamber. Jason Mills, ex-spouse, guardianship conflict incentive. Nathan Brooks, recent partner, ambiguous excuse, an unidentified resident with a grey sedan. Other potentials encompassed associate, or an outsider with entry to Emily. But for now, the emphasis stayed on the two males closest to her. Experienced investigators recognized most familial homicides originate from intimate connections. The reality might reside in Jason and Nathan's declarations if excavated profoundly enough. So they resolved to contrast the DNA from Emily's form with specimens from both males. Both hesitantly consented to furnish specimens. Outcomes would require days, but vowed to either absolve or fortify doubts. While awaiting, authorities constructed a more intricate chronology. They verified Emily returned abode immediately after her shift based on surveillance footage displaying her vehicle passing a primary crossroads at 7:15 p.m. From then until 8:30 p.m. when she messaged her acquaintance, everything appeared normal. A void surfaced from 8:40 to 10 p.m. A window where all information went mute. No communications, no messages, no residents hearing loud disturbances. This implied the slayer infiltrated Emily's abode during that window, acted rapidly and quietly. The investigative group remarked no traces of compelled ingress, the portal unlocked. This implied Emily voluntarily opened the portal for the culprit or they possessed a key. This detail heightened suspicion on Jason and Nathan. Only they were acquainted enough to be admitted into her abode late at dusk. By the conclusion of the initial week after Emily's demise, the whole precinct was under extreme strain. Public conjecture expanded. Some thought Jason was the slayer due to familial discord. Others directed at Nathan as the last individual near to her. The press delved into every particular, while Emily's kin could only beseech for the reality to surface soon. Principal investigator Sarah Jennings affixed a crimson memo to the panel. All trails lead back to two identities. One of them is deceiving. In the serene chamber, all gazes were fastened on the mute proof, awaiting responses from the facility. The DNA outcomes from the facility were still pending, but escalating society pressure compelled the Missoula authorities to expand their probe. Investigator Jennings and her group reassessed every citizen account, every hearsay, every minute particular. Within days, they focused on an identity cited by several residents. A wanderer frequently observed around Riverside Avenue, tall, scruffy, often scavenging through waste or panhandling outside the nearby convenience mart. Multiple individuals reported spotting him traverse Emily's residence on the night of October 15th around 9 p.m. This promptly made him the simplest mark to placate public worry. Authorities swiftly located him. Frank Dawson, 43, a vagrant with a history of vagrancy in Missoula. Frank was escorted to the precinct in a grimy overcoat, his tattered boots encrusted with frosty sludge. He conceded to traversing the area that evening, but maintained he solely rummaged the garbage for containers to vend, never infiltrating the residence. In the questioning chamber, Frank perspired abundantly, his tone shaking as he confronted suspicion of slaying. Investigators noted discrepancies. His boots were severely eroded, while the impressions at Emily's veranda were crisp and deep. Furthermore, the DNA from the sufferer's blood would soon furnish clarity. To be comprehensive, they amassed his tresses, blood, and saliva specimens. Frank was detained for 48 hours, and news of his custody disseminated rapidly. Residents exhaled in alleviation. Perhaps he's the one. The press implied that a suspect was detained, but 5 days later, the facility outcomes arrived. Frank's DNA didn't align with the specimen from Emily's form. No proof linked him to the locale. The public's preliminary alleviation turned to disillusionment. Frank was liberated, appearing depleted, and vanished into Montana's chill. Meanwhile, another hearsay emerged. Some inhabitants whispered about a substance-dependent youth, Kevin Bates, formerly apprehended for minor larceny in Missoula Valley. A few asserted to have spotted him in Riverside days before Emily's slaying, even rapping on portals to solicit funds. His unlawful background made him impossible to disregard. Authorities brought him in for interrogation in late October. Kevin, 31, emaciated and quivering, odor of heroin on his coat. In the questioning chamber, Kevin was restless. I had nothing to do with it. That evening, I was at my partner's camper viewing films all night. When urged for verification, his partner affirmed they were together, but conceded they were intoxicated on substances, unable to recollect precise times. This intensified authorities' suspicion. Kevin's DNA was dispatched for scrutiny, his boots and attire inspected, but the outcomes once more halted the probe. No alignments. Kevin was indicted with substance possession, but exonerated of the slaying. Two prospective suspects, an innocuous wanderer and a substance abuser, were liberated. The regional press, anticipating advancement, began doubting the authorities. Are they on the incorrect path? Many in Missoula questioned the officials' proficiency. At society gatherings, Emily's parents sat mutely, their gazes ablaze with fury as unfounded gossip about their daughter circulated. To them, the authorities' pursuit of erroneous trails not only squandered valuable time, but sullied the image of Emily, a benevolent, committed lady who never injured anyone. In the precinct's conference chamber, the whiteboard was littered with struck-through identities. Only Jason Mills and Nathan Brooks remained prominent from the outset. But if they were exonerated, who was the slayer? Why didn't the DNA align? A youthful investigator muttered, "We're circling." Jennings slammed the table. "No trail is futile, but we've strayed. We need to revert to what's definite. The offense locale proof." As dusk descended and frost concealed the tracks on Riverside Avenue, the Emily Hargrove slaying case entered its fourth week in a mist of ambiguity. The slayer remained free. Missoula's society existed in perpetual alarm, and investigators sensed the precious hours evaporating. Erroneous trails only lengthened the route to truth and Chilia. As the two prospective suspects were exonerated, and the Emily Hargrove case reached a stalemate, the pressure on the Missoula Police Department came not only from the dossiers on their desks, but from the mourning individuals outside. Emily's parents, Thomas and Evelyn Hargrove, contacted the precinct's tip line nearly daily for updates. Thomas's tone rasped over the line. "Have you discovered anything yet? Every day that elapses, I think of the slayer strolling free." Evelyn, choking back sobs, repeatedly requested to view case dossiers or images just to feel Emily wasn't overlooked. Their despondency cut like a blade into the investigators, who comprehended they couldn't furnish answers while lost in a labyrinth themselves. The press, particularly the Missoula Sentinel, published unyielding articles. Initially concise Missoula lady found deceased in residence. The accounts grew into extended analyses after weeks without responses, interviewing residents, specialists, even criminologists from the University of Montana. Headlines proclaimed, "Who slew Emily Hargrove? Missoula demands responses." Online remarks flooded in from locals and readers across Montana, filled with indignation, gossip, and conjecture. The press inadvertently amplified the pressure, transforming a personal calamity into a communal fixation. In Missoula's society, alarm and sorrow intertwined. On a frigid Sunday dusk in late October, hundreds assembled outside St. Mary's Chapel a few blocks from Emily's abode for a candlelight vigil. Flickering candle glow shimmered in the autumn gust, reflecting on sorrowful countenances. On the chapel steps, a large image of Emily stood beside fresh blossoms and plush toys brought by youngsters. Emily's closest friend, Rachel Thompson, grasped the microphone, tone quivering. Emily wasn't just a companion. She was a devoted parent, associate, always prepared to assist. We need justice for her, and we won't cease until the truth is uncovered. The assembly fell mute for an instant, then chanted in harmony, "Justice for Emily." The vista aired on regional TV, disseminating across Montana from Great Falls to Bozeman, but to Kalispell. Communities closely tracked the case. Social media clusters formed to exchange information, with some asserting to have observed something unusual on October 15th, contacting authorities. The Missoula Police Department, accustomed to managing minor theft or traffic incidents, now confronted hundreds of daily calls and emails, mostly gossip, but potentially harboring key hints. To handle the information flood, authorities launched a dedicated tip line for the Emily Hargrove case. Principal investigator Sarah Jennings read a press declaration on camera, her countenance stern, but gaze weary. "We urge anyone with information, no matter how trivial, to call the tip line. A seemingly insignificant detail could crack this case." The tip line number was bolded in newspapers, repeated on local radio, and posted on public bulletin boards across Missoula. However, the deluge of news and public opinion was both an aspiration and a load. Some callers vented alarm. Others reported false or mistaken information. Late at dusk, the tip line sometimes received calls with only heavy breaths before disconnecting. Yet the investigators believed one call amid hundreds could hold the critical trail to trace the slayer. The Hargrove kin, though depleted, refused to surrender. Thomas and Evelyn attended nearly every vigil, often addressing the society. "We know Emily can't return, but we won't let her slayer rest easy." The image of the elderly duo quivering in the autumn gust, clutching Emily's image and demanding justice, became an emblem of tenacity. In the precinct's conference chamber, the whiteboard was plastered with memos, identities, chronologies, and proof. Despite dozens of new trails from the tip line, none altered the case's course. A youthful officer sighed. "We're drowning in clamor. The truth is out there, buried in false tips." Jennings gripped her pen, responding, "We can't surrender. The public may pressure us, but from them, a single hint could lead to the slayer." As October concluded, the Emily Hargrove case was no longer just one kin's tale. It became Missoula's shared agony, a deep fissure in the sense of security long taken for granted. Residents kept igniting candles and beseeching while authorities sifted through the obscurity of overlapping trails. But one query echoed in everyone's minds. Who slew Emily? And when would justice articulate? While Missoula society remained in astonishment, with candles ignited nightly outside St. Mary's Chapel inside the precinct, investigator Sarah Jennings and her group knew the greatest pressure wasn't from the press or public, but from a small container holding the DNA specimen from Emily Hargrove's form. It was their most precious proof capable of identifying the slayer, or at least narrowing the probe. On October 25, 2010, the DNA was carefully bundled, labeled Case 102843, Hargrove, Emily, biological proof, and sent to the National Codes database. They hoped, even besought, it would align with a known offender from Montana or beyond. While awaiting outcomes, the conference chamber's ambience was suffocating. Investigators took turns staring at the whiteboard packed with particulars. Jason Mills, ex-spouse, guardianship incentive. Nathan Brooks, recent partner, vague excuse. Lesser identities like Frank Dawson, the Wanderer, or Kevin Bates, the addict. But these were just hypotheses. Only the Cody's outcomes could penetrate the fog. When the facility's email arrived, the group assembled. Sarah opened the PDF, scanning the bolded terms. No alignments found. Those 4 terms struck like a mallet, shattering fragile aspiration. No profile in the millions stored nationwide aligned with the specimen from Emily's form. The slayer had never been detained, left no trace in the system, or was simply a spectre still out there. A youthful officer exhaled in frustration. "We're back to the beginning." Sarah closed the account, her tone firm, but gaze tired. "No, we still have the DNA. It doesn't deceive. The system just doesn't know who he is yet." Her terms were more reassuring than certain, but everyone knew the harsh reality. With 2010 technology, no alignment meant an impasse. In the meeting that ensued, the group discussed next steps. Some suggested pressuring key suspects, Jason and Nathan, with more oversight or interrogations. Others urged focusing on the society, reviewing everyone who interacted with Emily in her final month. But all knew that without a DNA alignment, every hypothesis was an endless cycle. The press reported that Missoula authorities found nothing from scientific proof. Online forums conjectured the slayer might be an out-of-state vagrant who fled post-offense. These gossip deepened the Hargroves' despondency. Thomas repeatedly told TV crews, "If there's DNA, why can't they apprehend him? I don't comprehend." But in 2010, investigative genealogy, tracing suspects through familial DNA wasn't widespread, only gaining momentum after the 2018 Golden State Slayer case. For Missoula in 2010, everything hinged on Cody's. No alignment meant no advancement. Though disillusioned, Jennings insisted on preserving the DNA specimen under optimal conditions, hoping future technology would illuminate. "Don't forget," she told the group, "biological proof can endure decades. We don't know who slew Emily yet, but he left a piece of himself. One day, he won't evade." In the days that followed, the case slipped into the realm of a cold case. Authorities continued receiving hundreds of tip-line calls, mostly irrelevant or false. The Hargroves kept attending vigils, clutching Emily's image, their gazes heavy with disillusionment. In everyone's minds, the case became an open lesion seen by all, felt by all, but unhealable. In the 2010 year-end account, the Missoula Police Department wrote a single line: "Primary proof, DNA specimen, no alignment in Cody's. Case remains open." Those arid terms couldn't capture the investigators' frustration. Those who believed they held a golden key only to find the door to truth still locked. From then on, aspiration for solving Emily Hargrove's case was a flickering flame, awaiting a scientific wonder. By late 2011, after months of no advancement, the Emily Hargrove case was officially categorized as a cold case. The thick dossier of witness declarations, offense locale images, post-mortem outcomes, and Cody's accounts was sealed, numbered, and stored in the Missoula County Sheriff's Archive. On the dossier's spine, two stark terms, "open, unsolved," marked the end of the initial endeavors. Over the years, new investigators came and went, occasionally reviewing the dossier, checking particulars, but quickly turned to more pressing cases. Emily's case faded into the past, lying dormant on a chill wooden shelf with only dust and fading accounts as witnesses. Despite their age and frailty, Thomas and Evelyn Hargrove persisted on a path they believed only relentless pressure could force justice to speak. In late 2012, they founded the Emily Hargrove Memorial Fund, initially to support their grandson's education, but soon a symbol for the demand for truth. At fundraisers, they recounted Emily's tale, sparing no painful particular to convey the injustice. "We don't just want to remember Emily," Thomas said at a charity event to scores. "We want to ensure her slayer never rests easy." Regional press stayed on the case. Each year on the anniversary of Emily's demise, the Missoula Sentinel published reminders, but her parents actively pushed the story further. They contacted producers of cold case TV shows like Unsolved Mysteries and 48 Hours, sending declassified dossiers, offense locale images, and old news clippings. When an episode about Emily aired in 2017, Missoula relived the painful memory. Cameras captured Evelyn in her living room clutching Emily's image, saying, "I'll never cease until my eyes close. I'll keep calling out the slayer, even if he hasn't revealed his face." Her terms rang like her oath. The national television coverage helped Emily's tale spread further, becoming a textbook example of justice delayed. At conferences on improving homicide probes, experts cited the case to highlight the limitations of early 2010s forensic technology, DNA, and proof existed. But without matching tools, the perpetrator remained elusive. Emily Hargrove could have had justice sooner. An expert at a 2019 Montana criminology conference said if investigative genealogy had been available then in Missoula society, Emily's name took on a meaning beyond an individual. At annual vigils where hundreds of candles lit up outside St. Mary's Chapel, families of other unsolved slaying victims joined in. They saw Emily as a shared emblem for all souls without answers. Banners outside the chapel read, "Justice for Emily, justice for all." Emily's son, then 10 years old, stood among the crowd holding a candle. His sad but resolute gaze a living testament to his mother's unfinished legacy. Thomas frequently faced cameras for interviews. On a local radio program, he once said, "People say time heals wounds. For us, time only deepens the pain because every year that passes is another year the slayer walks free." Evelyn chose to write letters posted on society forums and sent to state legislators. In a 2020 letter, she wrote, "Montana cannot let cases like my daughter's fade into oblivion. If new technology exists, we must use it now. Every day delayed is a day justice gathers dust." Their tenacity sometimes irritated authorities, but couldn't be ignored. The Missoula County Sheriff's Office admitted that pressure from the Hargroves and the society kept the case from being forgotten. Yet in those long years, the slayer's name was never uttered. Emily Hargrove lived on only through her smiling image, the painful memories of those left behind, and italicized terms in news articles. Justice delayed for her kin. Justice wasn't an abstract concept. It was the stark truth. A name, a face, and a sentence for the one who destroyed their daughter's life. They vowed to keep knocking until the door of justice opened. In early 2020, as many Montana victims' families lost faith in justice after decades of waiting, an announcement from the Montana State Crime Lab in Billings sparked a new path. The lab officially adopted investigative genealogy, a method to trace suspects through familial DNA, proven effective after the 2018 Golden State Slayer case. Montana became one of the states committed to using it for cold cases. The news quickly reached the Missoula County Sheriff's Office, where Emily Hargrove's dossier had sat dormant in a cold archive for nearly a decade. Investigator Sarah Jennings, recently reassigned to lead cold cases, instantly recalled the memo she wrote in 2010. The slayer left DNA. Don't forget, over the years, she'd watched Emily's case fade into the shadows despite the Hargroves' relentless fight. Now, with investigative genealogy, a new opportunity emerged. At an internal meeting in early April 2020, Jennings placed the thick dossier on the table, looked at her group, and said, "We're bringing Emily back. The proof is still there. Technology has changed. It's time to try." Immediately, the DNA specimen from Emily's form in 2010 was retrieved from the Montana State Crime Lab's archive. The frozen glass container, repeatedly verified as stable, was reprocessed with advanced techniques, allowing far more detailed gene sequencing than tests a decade earlier. Specialists in clean rooms wearing white robes, masks, and gloves meticulously opened the container, extracting each precious drop. To them, it wasn't just a DNA specimen. It was the only key left to bring a slayer to light after 10 years of hiding. Once the gene sequence was successfully analyzed, the data was uploaded to open genealogy databases where millions of Americans had voluntarily submitted DNA for family tree research. The goal wasn't to find the suspect immediately, but to identify near or distant relatives with partial alignments, building a family tree to trace back to the most likely culprit. It was a months-long process requiring patience and sophisticated analysis. For Jennings, it was the first ray of light in years of darkness. Concurrently, Jennings spent nights rereading Emily's entire dossier. Jason Mills's declarations, gaps in Nathan Brooks's excuse, resident reports, discarded hypotheses. The crimson ink memos from years ago had faded, but the message remained. No compelled ingress, meaning the slayer was admitted by Emily. The biggest unanswered query persisted. Who was he and how did he enter? Without suspicion, Jennings believed the DNA would lead to the answer. News of investigative genealogy reached the Hargroves. In a private meeting at their abode, Jennings told Thomas and Evelyn, "We've sent Emily's DNA for testing with a new method. This time, we have real aspiration." Thomas gripped his wife's hand, eyes tearing up. "We've waited 10 years to hear this." Though they knew the process could take months, even a year, the Hargroves felt a spark of aspiration they thought was long lost. In Missoula, word of investigative genealogy spread quickly. The Missoula Sentinel published an article titled, "New DNA Technology May Unlock Hargrove Slaying Case," shared hundreds of times on social media. Locals buzzed with discussion. Some were optimistic, believing the technology would end the lingering nightmare. Others were skeptical, thinking it was too late, that the slayer might have left the state or died. Still, all eyes turned back to Emily's case after nearly a decade under time's dust. In her small office, Jennings pinned a new memo to the whiteboard. 2020, Investigative Genealogy. Our last shot. She knew she carried not just a legal duty, but the trust of an exhausted kin. She also knew Montana's archives held hundreds of other cold cases. But somehow Emily's had become a symbol, the case the state watched to prove new technology could restore justice. During long nights in Billings, as machines tirelessly analyzed gene segments, Jennings sat in her office staring at Emily's image on her desk. A young woman with auburn hair cascading to her shoulders, a gentle grin holding her young son. "We never forgot you," she whispered. For the first time in years, those terms weren't just comfort. They carried real aspiration. Nearly a decade of waiting might soon be rewarded. When Emily Hargrove's DNA data was successfully sequenced and uploaded to open genealogy databases like GeneMatch and Ancestry DNA, the forensic group in Billings and investigator Sarah Jennings watched anxiously. This wasn't a one-shot alignment like Cody's, but a giant puzzle where a single gene fragment could lead to a family tree spanning centuries. The first alignments appeared on screen, not the slayer, not parents or siblings, but distant relatives, fourth cousins or further. Still, for analysts, this was the necessary starting point. A notable alignment came from Ancestry DNA, an elderly gentleman in Flathead County, Montana, over 150 miles from Missoula. He had no unlawful record, having submitted his DNA for family history research. This coincidence opened a lead. The slayer likely shared a bloodline with him. Genealogists began reconstructing the man's family tree, stretching across generations from early 19th century Montana settlers to branches migrating to Idaho and Oregon. Jennings worked closely with an external genealogist. On a large board, they drew blue lines connecting branches, identities, birth dates, and residences. From one stranger's identity, a tree with hundreds of people emerged. But Jennings knew only one could be the slayer. Their task was to narrow the circle. Further analysis revealed the lineage split into 4 main branches after the great-grandfather's generation. One long settled in Kalispell, another moved to Bozeman, a third scattered across Missoula and nearby areas since the 1980s, and a fourth in Butte. The third branch was immediately highlighted in blue. If the slayer had access to Emily, he almost certainly lived or worked near Missoula in 2010. The following nights, the group drowned in data, scouring birth records, death certificates, marriage licenses, even old newspaper clippings. Each fragment narrowed the scope. The sprawling family tree was trimmed, leaving 4 likely lineages. Within each, they targeted men aged 30 to 50 in 2010, fitting the DNA profile and offense behavior. The initial list of over 25 identities shrank through eliminations based on residences and personal history. By mid-autumn 2020, Jennings's whiteboard listed 4 surnames, for distinct branches, 1 in Kalispell, 1 in Bozeman, 1 in Missoula, 1 in Butte. Next to each, she noted the number of living male members, their ages and basic profiles. "We're closer than ever," she told her group, her tone steady but gaze alight. "From an anonymous DNA specimen. We've narrowed it to 4 lineages. The slayer is hiding here." The Hargroves were updated on the progress. Hearing the family tree had been narrowed, Thomas teared up. "I never thought this would happen. After all these years, we finally have a real direction." Evelyn gripped his hand, her eyes shining, though they knew the journey was still long. In Missoula, news of investigative genealogy spread through articles. Locals began to grasp that this wasn't a game of chance, but a complex scientific probe. If they can find the slayer from distant relatives in Flathead County, a resident of Emily's said, maybe we'll finally get answers. Aspiration, once extinguished after years, flickered like a small flame in the wind. For Jennings, the challenge wasn't over. Narrowing to 4 lineages was only a midpoint. The next step was scrutinizing each individual in those branches, collecting indirect DNA specimens, and comparing them to the original. But for the first time in nearly a decade, the path was clearer. The slayer was no longer a nameless shadow. He was trapped within 4 surnames, 4 family branches, 4 roads waiting to be followed to the end. Among the 4 lineages identified through genealogical analysis, one identity emerged, impossible for investigator Sarah Jennings to ignore. Robert Klein, 49, a long-time Missoula plumber. Klein's identity wasn't unfamiliar to authorities. He was questioned in late 2010, weeks after Emily Hargrove's demise. Back then, he lived just a half-mile from Emily's abode, frequently visiting Riverside Avenue to service pipes for regular clients. He had a minor record of aggression, 3 tavern brawls, and a penalty for menacing his ex-partner during their separation. Though not a grave felon, his temperament and proximity to the locale had raised flags. But in 2010, DNA technology couldn't pinpoint anything concrete, and his declaration, though unstable, wasn't enough to indict him. As the case went cold, Klein's identity was buried among dozens of other suspects, fading into silence. Now, with new investigative genealogy data, Klein resurfaced in the Missoula branch, one of the 4 blue highlighted lineages, cross-referencing old records with the family tree. Jennings was stunned. Robert Klein was a distant relative of the Flathead County man in Indeed match. Statistical probability showed a blood connection too strong to dismiss. "We've come full circle," Jennings told her group, pointing to Klein's identity in blue on the whiteboard. "But this time, DNA is on our side." Old notes from Klein's 2010 interrogation were reopened. He'd asserted he was at his workshop late on October 15th repairing a leak, but the client he named confirmed the service was on October 13th, not 15. The date discrepancy could be a memory lapse, but to investigators, it was a crack too big to ignore. Additionally, Klein's stated departure time from the workshop didn't align, he said. 10 p.m. but a resident reported the workshop lights off around 8:30 p.m., the window of Emily's slaying. Moreover, a small but odd detail from 2010 stood out during questioning. Klein had a long gash on his forearm. He asserted it was from scraping against a pipe fitting, but no client confirmed a service that evening. When asked for a DNA specimen, he agreed only to fingerprints and a declaration. Back then, authorities lacked legal grounds to compel a DNA specimen, and as the case stalled, this detail was buried in hundreds of pages. Jennings now sat with the yellowed documents, flipping through each page. Particulars once fragmented in 2010, now connected like puzzle pieces. Klein isn't just in the circle of suspicion, she said firmly in a meeting. He's the center. To bolster the case, Jennings ordered a review of all Klein-related data, financial records, work history, habits. Investigators found that in 2010, Klein regularly visited Riverside Avenue to fix plumbing for 4 households, one just blocks from Emily's. He'd even been invited for tea at one home, meaning Emily might have met or seen him enough to open her door without suspicion if he knocked late. When internal whispers leaked that an old suspect was being re-examined, the Hargroves felt both aspiration and dread. Thomas recalled, "I heard Klein's identity in 2010, but then nothing more. If it's really him, we've lived 10 years with our daughter's slayer free in our society." Anger mixed with unease pushed the kin to urge authorities to act swiftly. Jennings knew that while the pieces pointed to Klein, she needed decisive proof, a direct DNA alignment. The unknown DNA from Emily's form was perfectly preserved, but to indict Klein, it had to align with his current DNA. The issue was that Klein could refuse to provide a specimen, so authorities needed a legal way to collect it indirectly. A plan was devised. Tail Klein, waiting for him to discard a personal item, a soda bottle, gum, or water cup for DNA. A covert surveillance group was formed, tracking him from workshop to abode. On autumn nights in 2020 Missoula, with frost piling on vehicle windows, investigators patiently waited for Klein to slip. Meanwhile, Jennings couldn't shake her obsession. She repeatedly reviewed 2010 offense locale images, cross-referencing Klein's old declarations, hunting for contradictions. She believed the DNA would soon expose him, but prepared for every scenario, knowing after all these years that justice never came easily. On the whiteboard, amid crossed-out identities, only 2 bold blue letters remained. Klein, the slayer, was no longer a vague shadow in a sprawling family tree. He had an identity, a face, and a past that could no longer stay hidden. In the final days of autumn 2020, Missoula was blanketed in thick frost, but within the small city, a covert surveillance operation unfolded with iron patience. Investigator Sarah Jennings and her group had zeroed in on Robert Klein as the prime suspect. And now they needed one thing, a direct DNA alignment. The plan sounded simple, but required meticulous precision as Klein was unaware he was under scrutiny. Instead of rushing for a search warrant, authorities deployed a surveillance group to track him day and night, waiting for moments when he discarded personal items containing DNA. A black SUV parked across from Klein's workshop, housing 2 plainclothes officers with binoculars and a handheld camera. Whenever Klein left home, another vehicle tailed him at a safe distance, rotating to avoid detection. On freezing nights, when car windows iced over, investigators endured, knowing a single soda bottle, gum wrapper, or coffee cup could seal the case that had lingered for 10 years. The first week, Klein was cautious, moving only between home workshop and a nearby mart, rarely lingering. But in the second week, a small opportunity arose. Klein sat in his workshop with associates, sipping soda and chewing gum. After the gathering, he stepped outside, tossing a soda bottle and gum wrapper into a trash bin by the door. As soon as he drove off, an officer disguised as a maintenance worker approached, collecting the entire trash bag. Each bottle and wrapper was sealed, numbered, and sent to the Billings lab. While awaiting outcomes, tension gripped the group. Jennings knew a non-alignment would collapse everything, forcing them back to zero. But an alignment would be the decisive proof to pull Emily Hargrove's case from the cold case shadows. Sleepless nights followed, with Jennings constantly checking her phone for lab updates. Then one early November morning, the call came. The specialist's tone boomed. Outcomes are in. DNA from Robert Klein's soda bottle and gum wrapper matches 100% with the DNA found on Emily Hargrove's form in 2010. In that instant, Jennings closed her eyes, hands trembling, swept by relief and a storm of emotions. The proof they'd awaited for nearly a decade was clear and undeniable. That afternoon, an urgent meeting convened at the Missoula County Sheriff's Office. The whiteboard, cluttered with memos, was wiped clean, leaving only DNA alignment. Klein. Investigators sat around the table, silenced by the proof await. A veteran officer whispered, "He's been free all these years right among us." Jennings nodded, resolute. "Not anymore. We've got him." The news wasn't yet public, but the Hargroves were privately informed. Hearing DNA alignment, Thomas and Evelyn broke down in their living room. Evelyn, sobbing, clutched her face. "Emily, my girl, we finally have our identity." Thomas gripped his wife's hand, whispering, "We didn't wait in vain." For them, this wasn't just an advancement. It was light. After a 10-year ordeal, however, Jennings knew the DNA was just the starting point for a long legal battle. To ensure a conviction held in court, she needed supporting proof, witness declarations, a chronology, and overlooked traces from the 2010 dossier. Once Klein was arrested, his defense group would scrutinize the DNA collection process. But Jennings believed that with a perfect alignment, they held the strongest card. Missoula's society, unaware of this advancement, continued lighting candles monthly. If they knew authorities had identified the slayer using technology unavailable in 2010, they might realize justice, though delayed, could return. In her quiet office, Jennings looked at Emily's image on her desk, whispering, "We heard you, and this time he won't escape." That night, as frost fell silently on Missoula's roofs inside the precinct, all eyes focused on one goal, preparing the arrest warrant for Robert Klein. The man DNA had named, the one who took Emily Hargrove's life. The absolute DNA alignment was a turning point, but to turn scientific outcomes into legal action, Missoula authorities needed the next step, an arrest warrant. Investigator Sarah Jennings and her group brought the updated dossier to the Missoula County Prosecutor's office. On Chief Prosecutor James Whitaker's desk lay a fixed stack of documents, 2010 offense locale images, forensic accounts, the Cody's analysis from that year, and most crucially, the 2020 DNA comparison showing a 100% alignment between the specimen from Emily's form and Robert Klein's discarded items. Whitaker read each line, occasionally looking up at Jennings. "We have a real shot. This isn't just suspicion anymore. It's direct proof." 4 hours, they refined the petition to the court, ensuring every detail of the process was clearly documented to withstand any defense challenges. Whitaker added, "The DNA specimen was collected from discarded items in public, legally without a warrant, sealed, and fully chain of custody compliant." When the dossier was complete, he handed it to Jennings for her investigative autograph. "Jennings, how long have you waited for this?" She sighed, tone hoarse. 10 years. And now it's time. The next morning, in the quiet Missoula County District Court, Judge Elizabeth Hayes flipped through the thick dossier, setting her glasses down. "This DNA proof is compelling. I see no reason for delay. I'm signing an emergency arrest warrant for Robert Klein." The sound of her pen on paper rang like a bell of reckoning. The warrant was stamped in blue, effective immediately. Returning to the precinct with the warrant, Jennings called an urgent task force meeting. On the board, she sketched Klein's house and workshop along with entry and exit routes. Klein has a history of minor aggression, but we can't rule out resistance. He's familiar with plumbing tools, and the workshop is full of potential weapons. A sergeant suggested a nighttime arrest, but Jennings shook her head. No, at night he has the advantage. We'll go during work hours when he's busy with pipes, less alert, and witnesses are around to deter rash actions. The plan was set. Friday morning, the task force would approach the workshop at 11 a.m., when Klein typically opened, but wasn't swamped with customers. 2 patrol cars would block the road's ends. A plainclothes group would enter pretending to inquire about services, while the arrest group swept in from behind. Every scenario was calculated. If Klein barricaded himself, they had a search warrant. If he resisted, an armed group was ready. But Jennings stressed, priority 1 is a safe arrest. No gunfire. We want Klein in court, not in a coroner's account. The night before the operation, Jennings sat alone in her office. She placed Emily Hargrove's image on her desk, her gaze lingering on the young woman's gentle grin. 4 years, this case had haunted her like an unpaid debt. Now, with the arrest warrant in hand, she knew justice was at the door, but she also felt the weight. One mistake could unravel everything. She whispered like her oath, "Emily, tomorrow we'll name him." On the morning of June 4, 2022, Missoula's sky was clear. The crisp early summer air enveloping the street where Robert Klein's small workshop stood. Since dawn, patrol cars quietly took positions at both ends of the road while plainclothes task force members posed as customers walking into the workshop. At 11 o'clock, the workshop door was wide open, the hum of an old water pump mixing with the clink of metal tools. Klein in a stain-covered overalls was crouched inspecting a valve when a man in a denim jacket approached, asking loudly, "Got time to check a leak?" Klein looked up frowning, but before he could reply, the workshop's rear door slammed open and 6 armed officers stormed in, shouting, "Police! Robert Klein, you're under arrest for the slaying of Emily Hargrove." In that instant, Klein froze, eyes wide, dirt-covered hands stilled on the valve. He stammered, "What is this? A error? I didn't do anything." An officer swiftly cuffed his hands behind his back as Jennings stepped forward, reading the warrant aloud, word for word. Klein's face paled, and he tried to protest, tone trembling. "I just fix pipes. You've got the wrong guy." His terms echoed through the workshop amid the smell of rust and the drone of an idle compressor. Police sirens wailed outside, drawing residents and passers-by. Curious onlookers gathered, eyes wide as Klein was escorted out in his stained overalls, handcuffed. A middle-aged lady gasped, "My God, he's serviced pipes for this town for over a decade. How could he?" A gentleman nearby shook his head, stunned. "I took my sink to him dozens of times." Unbelievable. Shock spread like wildfire as Klein was a familiar face, an ordinary man in Missoula's small society. By noon, the news exploded across Montana's press. The Missoula Sentinel's front page blared. Arrest made in 2010 cold case slaying of Emily Hargrove. Local TV interrupted regular programming for live coverage from the locale. Images of Klein, head bowed, being led to a police car aired on every evening broadcast. News outlets from Great Falls, Billings, and Kalispell reported in unison, emphasizing that after a decade, new DNA technology had cracked one of Montana's most haunting slayings. At a press conference, Jennings stood sternly beside Prosecutor Whitaker. "DNA doesn't lie," she declared to dozens of microphones. We aligned the specimen from the 2010 offense locale to Robert Klein's personal items. The outcomes are a perfect alignment. This is a decisive advancement, and today we arrested the suspect. Her terms rang with finality, marking the moment justice began returning to Emily Hargrove. The society's reactions were mixed. Some exhaled in relief, believing the decade-long nightmare had an answer. Others couldn't believe it. Social media erupted with comments. "He seemed so friendly. I knew him," countered by, "Don't forget Emily. She's the sufferer. DNA proved it." Heated debates flared, but all eyes turned to the upcoming trial. The Hargroves, upon hearing of the arrest, were flooded with mixed emotions. Thomas, teary-eyed, told TV cameras, "We waited 12 years for this moment. Though a long road lies ahead in court, at least now we know justice is moving." Evelyn clutched Emily's image, tone choked. "My daughter will never come back, but at least the slayer's identity has been brought to light." In the quiet workshop after the arrest, rust stains lingered on the floor, half-fixed fixtures left abandoned, but no one cared about services anymore. All eyes were on the Missoula County Courthouse, where Robert Klein's fate would be decided. For Missoula, June 4, 2022 wasn't just an arrest day. It was the day a decade-old cold case flared to life, shaking the society and becoming Montana's focal point. In a small questioning chamber at the Missoula Police Department, cold fluorescent light glared down on a metal table, reflecting off Robert Klein's tense face, still in his stain-covered overalls. His hands were lightly cuffed to the chair. Across from him sat Investigator Jennings and another officer, a thick dossier open before them. As the camera began recording, Jennings spoke. "Mr. Klein, you're under arrest for the suspected slaying of Emily Hargrove on the night of October 15, 2010. Do you have anything to say?" Klein looked up, tone sharp. "I didn't do it. You've got the wrong guy. I never harmed anyone." For the first hours, he denied everything. Every question about that night, Drew. "I was at the workshop, or I don't recall, or I'm not involved." Jennings patiently revisited his 2010 declarations, pointing out contradictions in dates and times, the gash on his forearm. Klein frowned, tapping the table, trying to stay calm. "It's just a mix-up. I fix pipes every day. Easy to forget particulars." But his gaze wavered whenever Emily's identity came up. Then Jennings placed a clear proof bag on the table, containing a sealed gum wrapper. She said slowly, "We recovered DNA from this. It aligns 100% with the specimen found on Emily Hargrove's form." Klein froze momentarily. His lips twitched, but no sound came. The chamber sank into heavy silence. He stared at the plastic bag, sweat beading on his forehead. After minutes of silence, Klein took a deep breath, shifting tone. "I met Emily once. Maybe my DNA got on something from before. You're misunderstanding." Jennings leaned in, gaze locked on him. "Once. Explain. When? Where?" Klein looked at his hands, tone faltering. "I vaguely recall. She came to the workshop with her associate. I said, 'Hi.' Maybe I was chewing gum, and DNA got on her coat. That's all." Jennings couldn't suppress a faint wry smile, then said sternly, "Mr. Klein, DNA doesn't walk from your workshop to the sufferer's bed. It doesn't appear in her form. Don't underestimate us." Her terms cut like a knife through the facade Klein tried to build. He squirmed, leaning back, gaze darting. Over the next hours, Klein changed tactics. Sometimes he sat silent, staring at the table. Other times, he spun vague scenarios. "Maybe I visited her, but I don't recall clearly. Maybe I gave her something. But all were implausible, as no record showed any relationship between him and Emily. Each new particular he fabricated, Jennings countered with proof, exposing contradictions. After nearly 9 hours, Klein's initial defiance waned. His tone grew weary, gaze red from stress and impatience. "I didn't slay her," he repeated, but without conviction, as if trying to convince himself more than refute the proof. In her account, Jennings noted, the suspect visibly wavered when confronted with DNA proof, initially denying outright. He later attempted to explain his DNA's presence, but his declarations were contradictory and illogical. This behavior suggests clear awareness of an undeniable truth. That night, as Klein was escorted back to his holding cell, his face was transformed, no longer defiant, only weighed by anxiety. In the dim hallway, Jennings watched, her heart heavy. She knew the legal battle ahead was long, but the biggest turning point had arrived. The slayer was no longer a nameless shadow. He had her identity, a face, and the cracks in his decade-long facade were showing. After the tense interrogation where Robert Klein repeatedly denied guilt, then scrambled for explanations for the DNA proof, investigator Sarah Jennings returned to the old case dossiers, determined to answer the big question. Why was Emily his target? Only by understanding the incentive could they build a complete picture. Convincing a jury this wasn't a mistake, but a deliberate, dangerous act. The group reviewed 2010 data, focusing on Klein's workshop. In a seemingly minor record, they found Emily had brought her vehicle there for repairs that summer, months before her slaying. A former employee who handled customer intake recalled Emily as a polite young lady, often with a child in the car. This clarified that Klein had direct contact with Emily, contradicting his claim of a single vague encounter. From this lead, a hypothesis emerged. During that brief interaction, Klein may have developed an obsession with Emily, a single man living in isolation with a volatile temperament. He might have seen her as both approachable and unattainable. This explained how he knew her address, confident enough to knock late at night without arousing suspicion. Investigators dug deeper. They noted Klein's history of aggression toward women. His ex-partner reported controlling behavior, threats, and occasional drunken assaults. A former associate recalled Klein making rude remarks about female customers, once boasting he had his eye on an attractive one. Definitely would see her again. These scattered pieces formed a troubling picture. Klein harbored obsessive tendencies prone to aggression when rejected. The incentive clarified Emily, a young single parent, may have become a target. Klein sought to control to satisfy warped desires. When rebuffed or denied, his obsession turned to rage. Criminologists call this possessive aggression beyond attraction, a need to dominate and force submission. In her analysis to Prosecutor Whitaker, Jennings wrote, Klein likely developed an obsession after their initial workshop encounter. On the night of October 15, 2010, he followed Emily home, approaching when she just put her son to sleep. No compelled ingress suggests Emily recognized him or didn't suspect him at her door. When she rejected his advance, his aggression was triggered, leading to sexual violation and slaying. The Hargroves, hearing the hypothesized incentive, were stunned, Thomas whispered. So she just took her car for a routine repair, and that put her in his sights. Evelyn covered her face, tears streaming, realizing Emily's tragedy stemmed from something so mundane. For the prosecutor, this incentive was critical. Whitaker stressed, in court, DNA is the science, but incentive is the tale that makes a jury understand why. We must show Klein wasn't randomly suspected. He had a past opportunity and reason to target Emily. The group sought more witnesses. anyone who heard Klein mention Emily or saw him near her abode. A resident recalled seeing a man in a navy overalls, like a plumber's uniform, near Emily's alley in early September 2010. But no one thought it alarming. Then this was added to the dossier as supporting proof. Missoula's society, as news of the incentive leaked, was both enraged and chilled. Experts in the press noted the case exposed the dark side of fleeting interactions in small communities. A glance or greeting could become a deadly obsession in a disturbed mind. This is a textbook case of justice delayed. An editorial wrote because an obsession took a life in 2010, but only a decade later did we name the perpetrator. For Jennings, the incentive wasn't just for the jury, but to answer Emily's son, now 15. One day he'd ask, "Why was my mom slain?" Now they had an answer. A man with a sick obsession, unable to accept boundaries, turned a chance encounter into a bloody tragedy. When prosecutor James Whitaker officially announced the DNA outcomes in a private meeting with the Hargrove kin, the small chamber in the Missoula County Courthouse was steeped in tense silence. Thomas and Evelyn sat across from him, their aged hands clasped tightly, gaze trembling with anticipation. Whitaker set the dossier on the table, his tone calm but resolute. The DNA specimen from the 2010 offense locale aligns perfectly with Robert Klein's DNA. There is no doubt he is the one who slew Emily. Those terms cut like a blade, reopening old wounds while unlocking the final door to truth. Thomas burst into tears, his choked sobs echoing in the quiet chamber. Evelyn dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, her tone breaking. "I've waited 12 years just to hear those 3 terms. No more doubt." Emily's son, now 15, was present. Until now, he only vaguely knew his mother was slain, never told who did it. Hearing Robert Klein, his face flickered with confusion, then sank into silence. After the meeting, he softly asked his grandmother, "Who is he? Have I ever met him?" The innocent, painful question overwhelmed Evelyn, who hugged her grandson tightly, whispering, "You don't need to know him. What matters is we now know who did it, and he'll never hurt anyone again." The kin's emotions were a mix of relief and pain. Relief because justice was no longer a vague promise. It had her identity, a face, proof, but the pain deepened knowing the slayer wasn't a stranger. He lived among them, shook hands with residents, fixed pipes for acquaintances, Thomas said bitterly. For 12 years, we passed his workshop countless times, never knowing the slayer was right there. It's chilling to think about. For the boy, the truth was like a shard of broken glass piercing his heart. He sat in his bedroom staring at a photo of his smiling mother holding him as a toddler. "Now I know who took my mom from me," he wrote in his journal. "But I still don't understand why Mom didn't do anything wrong." Those scrawled terms, secretly read by Evelyn, made her sob, encapsulating a loss no comfort could erase. That evening, the kin lit candles before Emily's photo in their living room. The flickering light illuminated their weary but determined faces. Thomas placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder, saying softly, "Your mom's name has been honored in justice, but we still have a long road ahead." In that moment, they felt their hearts freed from uncertainty. Yet, weighed by the stark truth, the slayer existed, and he'd been far too close in their daily lives. In Missoula society, as news of the DNA alignment spread, residents visited the Hargroves. An elderly lady from across the avenue said through tears, "I still remember the night Emily was slain. Blue and crimson lights flashing on the frost. Now, at least we know who committed the offense." But for the kin, the truth wasn't so simple. It brought answers, but reopened scars thought to have healed. Late at night, Evelyn sat alone by the window, watching frost fall on the porch, thinking of her daughter. "Emily," she whispered, I promised I'd never give up. Now I've kept my word. But I wish you were here to see." Tears rolled down her cheeks, mingling with the endless pain of a mother who finally knew the truth, but could never hold her daughter again. After the Hargroves absorbed the bitter truth that Robert Klein slew Emily, the next step in the journey for justice was preparing for trial. Missoula County Prosecutor James Whitaker and his group began assembling every piece to build a solid case. Their meeting table was stacked with documents. The 2010 post-mortem account, Klein's contradictory initial declarations, a chronology of the sufferer's movements that night, resident testimony about a man in overalls near Emily's abode, and above all, the DNA outcomes, proof that doesn't lie, Whitaker said firmly. We must prove not only that Klein was at the locale, but that he alone had the incentive and opportunity to commit the offense. However, the defense didn't sit idle. Klein's court-appointed attorney, experienced in major cases, targeted the case's newest element, investigative genealogy. In their first meeting, he declared, "We question the legality of using DNA data from genealogy sites. My client never consented to his DNA being in a public database. This is a privacy violation." The argument set the stage for a contentious trial, impacting not just Emily's case, but the future of hundreds of cold cases across the U.S. In the weeks that followed, legal debates erupted. The prosecution argued the DNA was legally collected from Klein's discarded items, a soda bottle, a gum wrapper, and using genealogy databases was as legitimate as tracing phone records or bank data. "There's nothing private about what he left in the trash," Whitaker emphasized. "And there's nothing illegal about comparing that DNA to data voluntarily submitted to genealogy databases." The defense countered with broader concepts: genetic privacy, consent of GED match and ancestry DNA users, and the risk of setting a precedent for data misuse. "If you allow this today," the attorney said, "tomorrow any of us could be traced through a distant relative's DNA submitted for ancestry research. This is a dangerous slope." Jennings, assisting the prosecution, felt the pressure. She knew if the court accepted the defense's argument, the DNA proof, the case's cornerstone, could be thrown out. But she believed justice would side with science. In a strategy meeting, she said, "The question isn't whether this technology is legal. It's whether we'll let a slayer walk free just because the technology outpaces current law." Beyond DNA, the prosecution bolstered peripheral proof. The chronology was precise. Emily left work at 7 p.m., messaged a friend at 8:30, then went silent. During that window, Klein's workshop lights were off, and his claim of working on a fixture didn't match client records. A resident confirmed seeing a man in a plumber's overalls near Emily's alley in early September. Supporting the hypothesis, Klein stalked her before acting. His interrogation contradictions, denying involvement, then admitting meeting Emily once, would be shown to the jury to prove his wavering dishonesty. Meanwhile, Klein remained in county jail awaiting trial. Montana's press updated constantly, covering legal progress, and the public debate was investigative genealogy, a double-edged sword. Some editorials supported it, saying it brought justice to forgotten sufferers. Others warned of privacy risks. Emily's tale thus transcended Missoula, becoming a statewide topic. The Hargroves, amid the legal storm, cared only about one thing: getting the case to trial, so Klein faced his actions. Thomas told the press, "Privacy matters, but justice for my daughter matters more. We don't want a slayer walking free over a legal loophole." His terms moved many Montanans, fueling support for investigative genealogy. As the preliminary hearing neared, Whitaker compiled all proof into a thick dossier labeled State of Montana versus Robert Klein. He knew he wasn't just fighting for Emily, but for a new investigative method that could open or close the door for hundreds of cold cases. In Jennings's determined gaze and the Hargroves' choked sobs, he found strength for the fierce legal battle ahead. In April 2023, the Missoula County Courthouse in Missoula became Montana's focal point. From early morning, dozens of reporters with cameras and microphones crowded outside, broadcasting live. Locals lined the cold stone steps, vying for courtroom seats. The courthouse bulletin read, "State of Montana versus Robert Klein. Homicide trial." The identity haunting for over a decade was now formally in the defendant's chair. Inside, Robert Klein appeared in a wrinkled navy suit, hair neatly trimmed compared to his arrest day. He sat silently, avoiding eyes, as his two defense attorneys whispered beside him. Across the chamber, Prosecutor James Whitaker adjusted his thick dossier. Investigator Sarah Jennings sat in the witness section, her gaze fixed on the man she'd pursued for years. The Hargroves, Thomas, Evelyn, and Emily's 16-year-old son, sat quietly in the front row, their faces a mix of resilience and grief. In his opening, Whitaker addressed the jury with a resonant tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, DNA doesn't lie. It doesn't forget, doesn't stray. And after 13 years, it points to one identity, Robert Klein. He slew Emily Hargrove, parent of a 3-year-old, thinking he'd escape. But science brought him here today." The term silenced the chamber, pens scribbling furiously in reporters' notebooks. The defense countered, "We don't deny DNA was found. But we question, was its collection and use legal? Does investigative genealogy violate citizens' privacy? This is a dangerous precedent." They stressed Klein never consented to his relatives' DNA being used for comparison. The justice versus privacy debate became the trial's flashpoint from day one. Over the following days, witnesses testified. A resident recounted seeing a man in a navy overalls resembling Klein near Emily's alley in early September 2010. A former associate described Klein's rude remarks about female customers at the workshop. These weren't absolute proof, but painted a man with obsessive tendencies toward women. The trial's core was the DNA expert. Dr. Karen Ellis from the Montana State Crime Lab detailed the process from the 2010 offense locale specimen to the 2020 gene sequencing and alignment with Klein's soda bottle and gum wrapper. The alignment is 100%. No other individual globally could align so perfectly unless it's Robert Klein, she affirmed. When Whitaker asked Dr. Ellis, "Can DNA be wrong?" she replied curtly, "No." The courtroom buzzed. Her terms later headlined, "DNA doesn't lie." The Hargroves testified, too. Thomas's tone recounted years of hopeless waiting, sleepless nights, and the moment the DNA alignment was confirmed. Evelyn, sobbing, faced Klein. "You took my daughter, left my grandson motherless. Look at us and see your crime's consequences." The chamber fell silent, many wiping tears. Emily's son, now 16, wasn't a witness. But his sorrowful gaze moved the jury. The defense tried sowing doubt, suggesting DNA could transfer indirectly, that open genealogy databases were invasive. But the prosecution fired back. Klein's DNA wasn't on a sleeve or tool. It was in the sufferer's form. No one can explain that except his offense. In the fourth week, the jury watched Klein's 2022 interrogation video. His denials, waverings, and claim of meeting Emily once played on a large screen. His sweating face and darting gaze vivid. Whitaker stood, pointing, "This isn't an innocent man's terms. This is someone who knows DNA exposed him and is desperately seeking an out." 4 weeks, reporters covered every particular. The Missoula Sentinel called it the trial of the decade. Montana radio aired constant commentary, debating DNA technology's legal implications. In coffee shops, Locals argued some couldn't believe the familiar plumber was a slayer. Others said the proof was undeniable. As the trial neared its end, tension peaked. Whitaker closed his prosecution with a powerful declaration. Emily Hargrove can't defend herself anymore. But science spoke for her. Don't let justice be delayed again. Deliver the verdict she deserves. The chamber fell silent. All eyes on the jury who'd listened for weeks and now held Robert Klein's fate. When the jury returned, the Missoula courtroom's air was thick, as if everyone held their breath. The 12 members, faces solemn, took their seats. Judge Hayes asked the familiar question, "Have you reached a verdict?" The jury foreperson stood, holding a trembling paper. "We find the defendant, Robert Klein, guilty of first-degree slaying, recommended sentence, life without parole." In that instant, the chamber erupted with sobs, sighs of relief and stunned silence. Klein sat motionless, face pale, gaze blank on the floor. His attorneys bowed their heads, knowing arguments about privacy or DNA procedures couldn't save him. The judge delivered the final sentence. Tone firm Robert Klein, you are sentenced to life imprisonment at Montana State Prison with no possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your life in confinement, and justice for Emily Hargrove has finally been served. The gavel's bang ended the weeks-long trial. The Hargroves embraced, tears streaming. Thomas, tone trembling, told reporters, "Justice came late, but it came. We promised we'd never give up, and today we kept that promise to our daughter." Evelyn held her grandson's hand, whispering, "Your mom's honor is restored. You can hold your head high." Montana's press erupted. Evening news showed Klein escorted from court with commentary. A decade-long cold case finally solved. Editorials praised the authorities' tenacity and DNA technology's new era in probes. But beneath the triumph lingered a heavy truth. Missoula faced the reality that a slayer lived among them for years, in a familiar workshop everyone visited. In town, candlelight vigils dwindled, replaced by society meetings on neighborhood safety. Residents discussed locking doors better, reporting strangers. Missoula healed slowly, but Emily's memory lingered in a photo at the local library. A scholarship fund in her name whispered stories in Main Street's small cafes. For the Hargroves, the verdict didn't erase the loss. Thomas admitted, "We'll never truly close this chapter. Emily will always be missing from our dinners, our holidays, but at least we no longer live in uncertainty." Emily's son, now a teenager, understood his mother died from a cruel act, but learned from his grandparents' resilience and belief that justice, though delayed, could prevail. Missoula returned to daily life, but the collective wound never vanished. On autumn nights, as frost blanketed roofs, many recalled October 2010 when crimson and azure lights flashed on frosty streets. Montana's image remained serene, towering mountains, quiet towns under frost. But beneath that calm, Emily Hargrove's memory and the case's shadow endured, a reminder that even in the safest places, darkness could creep. Only truth and justice could bring light, however late, to wounds that never fully heal. The tale of Emily Hargrove and Robert Klein's conviction isn't just a cold case closed, but a mirror reflecting issues in modern America. First, it shows forensic technology's power. Without investigative genealogy, DNA comparison via ancestry databases, Missoula's mystery might have remained unsolved. This underscores the need to invest in science and investigative technology to protect communities and deliver justice even years later. Second, it warns of seemingly harmless daily interactions. Emily simply took her car to a familiar workshop, becoming the target of a warped obsession. Communities must stay vigilant, encouraging women and children to report odd behaviors, however minor, to prevent tragedy. Third, the kin and society's tenacity is invaluable. Emily's parents never gave up for over a decade, founding a memorial fund and pressuring press, keeping the case alive. This proves that in America, citizens' voices can drive change, forcing the legal system to act. Finally, Klein's life sentence without parole reminds us that justice, though delayed, retains its value. In a time when Americans often fear justice is tardy or unfair, Emily Hargrove's tale affirms that truth finds a way if we persist and fight. If you found the tale of Emily Hargrove's case and the decade-long journey for justice meaningful, please subscribe to stay updated on future tales. Thank you for joining us, and see you in the next video with more journeys to uncover the truth.